From a distance, there is very little about figwort to catch the eye or hold your attention. But if you can get up closer and begin to see the flower as a visiting insect might, you'll discover a flower that has a floral pattern that is uniquely its own. And one of the most unusual and distinctive things about figwort is that it sets out to cater for large social wasps and is highly adapted to that end. The inflorescence is a cyme, which is a repeatedly branched flowering stem where each growing point ends in a flower, and the way the flowers are arranged greatly enhances the chances of cross-pollination. The five-lobed purple corolla is like a miniature pulpit, with two overlapping lobes forming an awning over the top that extends over the throat of the flower. Two other lobes at the sides at right angles to the awning, and at the bottom is a bib-like lobe that curls forward and then reflexes downward, like a rounded windowsill. When the flower first opens, the style occupies centre stage, curling up and leaning on the windowsill, crowned with a coronet of crystal-like papillae, the stigma. It's like a puppet version of someone standing in a canopied pulpit. There is no sign of the stamens at this stage. They are curled up and tucked away at the bottom of the cup-like corolla. In other words, the flowers are protogynous, the carpels maturing before the stamens. Once pollination has occurred, the style droops down so that the stigma is now hanging forward over the windowsill out of the way of visitors. Meanwhile, the filaments of the four stamens elongate to position the anthers in two pairs, one pair on top of the other, leaning forward and out above the windowsill. Here is a diagram showing the flower in cross-section in the female phase on the left and in the male phase on the right. The windowsill acts as a landing platform, but not a very secure one, so that a visiting wasp has to cling to the outside of the flower with all 6 of its legs as it reaches in to get at the nectar, 2 large drops of which are secreted by the yellowish base of the ovary. Keeping in mind then that figwort is a specialist wasp flower, when a bee visits a spike of flowers like this, it usually visits the lower flowers first and then gradually makes its way up the spike. And most bee flowers like that, where the flower is a spike, they tend to be protandrous. In other words, the stamens mature first. In bee flowers, therefore, the lowest flowers are the older flowers and they're in the female stage. So that when a bee arrives at a spike and begins to visit the flowers at the bottom, it will pollinate these first because they're in the female stage, and then gradually as it moves out it will gather pollen which it will then take away with it when it visits the next flower. When wasps visit a floral spike, on the other hand, they visit the upper flowers first, which are in the female stage. They are the youngest flowers. And only gradually then, having pollinated those, as they move further down the spike, they will then pick up pollen, which they will carry away to the next flowers visited. Note that there are 4 instead of the 5 stamens that symmetry might lead you to expect. The 5th stamen is indeed present, but it has lost its original function. Here it is, this dark purple structure with a black front edge attached between the 2 lobes that make up the awning. This transformed stamen is technically described as a staminode. What was once the anther projects over the throat of the flower as a notched flap. Its function is to force the visiting wasp to duck, which presses it more firmly into contact with the anthers at the threshold. Small wasps of many sorts are frequent visitors to unspecialized flowers that cater for a wide variety of potential pollinators. But the small cohort of flowers that want to employ the pollination services of the larger social wasps have a distinctive suite of characteristics to do so more efficiently. They are typically small, globe-shaped flowers, often red or purple in colour, producing abundant nectar at the base of the corolla tube. Pollen is not a wasp food, but sugar is an essential component in the diet of the larvae. Social wasps like this are by far the commonest visitors, but honeybees will frequently take advantage of the open nectar supply. Notice that in figwort, pollen is deposited on and picked up from the insect's lower surface, which is much less common than an arrangement where the pollen is deposited on and from the insect's upper surface. There's a big word for this. Flowers like figwort are described as sternotribic. When the pollen is deposited on the bee's dorsal surface, the more common arrangement, the flower is nototribic. The name figwort refers to the resemblance of the fruits of the plant to miniature figs, which split down the middle to release numerous seeds when the fruits are ripe. But in earlier times, the word fig was also used to describe the swellings associated with piles. And this resemblance suggested to the medieval imagination that perhaps the plant could be used as a cure for piles. And in fact, figwort had a very high medicinal reputation in earlier times. But the main species used for this was knotted figwort. There are some 200 species worldwide, of which we have two common species in this country: water figwort, which is the one we have here, and knotted figwort, which grows in drier places, particularly on waste ground and such like. And if you look at the scientific name for the plant, the scientific name for knotted figwort is Scrofularia nodosea. And the Scrofularia is a reference to a condition known as scrofula, which was tuberculosis of the lymph glands, particularly in the neck. And the connection here was the resemblance of the open throat of the flower to an open mouth, a throat. In fact, it's not all that long ago here in Ireland when figwort was widely used to make an ointment, pounded the roots mixed with lard and used to treat piles and a whole range of other skin infections particularly, as well as a serious disease in horses known as farcy, a bacterial infection of the skin in horses. But I have to conclude by reading for you a remedy from Mrs. Greaves' hugely influential modern herbal, which was first published in 1931. It has nearly 1,000 pages, as you can see, and that tells us that figwort was said to be able to cure hydrophobia. Now, hydrophobia is a late-stage symptom of rabies, and at that advanced stage is invariably fatal. And what's amazing about this is that this should appear in what was a deeply influential herbal text of just a century ago. Now, this is what Mrs. Greaves had to say. Take every morning while fasting a slice of bread and butter on which the powdered knots of the roots have been spread, and eat it up with 2 tumblers of fresh spring water. Then let the patient be well clad in woolen garments and made to take a long, fast walk until in a profuse perspiration, the treatment being continued for 7 days.